No wonder mama sent me to college. No wonder she said, son, remember the power's in the knowledge. Power's in the knowledge. Join the glorious struggle to maintain and stand silent. One people on a mission of truth. You can't believe what they said about you. The power's in the knowledge.
Most anthropologists have been satisfied to go looking for vanishing little tribes, utterly irrelevant, the Booga Booga and the Luga Booga. And they go and they spend 6 months a year and they study all they know about the Luga Boogas. All their little ritual and their dances and their kinship system, who is my mother's brother, sister, son, etc. Utterly irrelevant to any illuminating vision of African civilization. And they come and they extrapolate masses of things about it. And so we have thousands and thousands of books about Africa that tell us absolutely nothing about the quintessential African. You cannot imagine what a Holocaust hit Africa. You cannot imagine what it is to take about 100 million people, the youngest people, and rip them out of the heart and core of a continent, the disintegration of family networks, the tremendous things that fell on Africa, the disease in one area in Tanzania. There were 5 million head of cattle. Europeans came in, introduced rinderpest, not deliberately, but they introduced it nevertheless. Almost all the cattle disappeared. You cannot imagine in the Americas, millions of people vanished just because of the common cold which Europeans had introduced in America. You are not aware of the massive destruction of civilization, so that people could mock us now and say, are you talking about all the great things that you did? If you did all of these great things, why are you not great now? What has happened to you? Why are you so broken and shattered and fragmented and lost? Why do you feel so inferior? We feel inferior and fragmented because we have lost a sense of the wholeness of our history. Because we can only heal, and this is true for the black as well as for the white, both the prisoner and the imprisoned. Both the prisoner, and the jailer. We are doing this because it is necessary to revise the history of man. The tremendous anguish which is deep in the heart of all of us, which arises out of these falsehoods, the falsehoods upon which this civilization are built, have got to go.
With jet black faces once walked the earth all alone, no other races, until he traveled to the other lands colder than the motherland, and then the cross began. That's when the frost began, the pigment loss began. The further north this man traveled as he crossed new land, the man in the ice who once walked in the sand, soon he began to lose his
tan. This is a figure, a sculpture that was found
yet on the inside.
And one of the things that they have
he was still African.
Is that many of the sculptures of early Europe show various African types. In fact, 55,000 years ago, according to 3 labs, the University of Oxford, the University of Hawaii, the University of California at Berkeley have come to the conclusion that there are no people on the earth 55,000 years ago who are not black Africans.
Same thing would have been true.
Okay.
Then this is bone evidence. There is a rule by one of the old Egyptologists and paleontologists that said that the typical Kemetic type was short arm and negrito, if you look at all the skeletal remains. Then the fifth...
we'll go to the next. I think we
can go to the next. This would be a slide of the from the tomb of Ramesses III, showing the 2 black figures in there. One is Kemetic and the other is Nubian, showing that there's no difference between the Kamite and the Nubian, but the other 2 are Asian and kind of European, and there is a pictured difference in that tomb between the Asians and Europeans, but not between the Egyptians and the Nubians. I think that's very important. The Kemetic people call themselves black people. And Cheikh Anta Diop, again, has gone through the proof of that through the analysis of certain Medu Neter hieroglyphic designations. In particular, the name Kemet, K-M-T, not just K-M. K-M is black, but when you add the T to it as a determinative, and when you add the key to it, Kemetu, and when you add the determinative, little man and little woman, with 3 strokes under them, that's the plural. So that's man and woman plural. That means people. And Kemetu means the black people, not the black land. And that argument has been made in Cairo, by the way, at the symposium sponsored by UNESCO, where everybody was invited to talk about the color of the ancient Egyptians, or the race of the ancient Egyptians. Logic, arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and music, what we call the 7 liberal arts. This was the educational system that was in place at the time that Greek people came to Kemet.
Now go back and show who the people were that established this.
Okay, the people, the ones
images you showed earlier.
Okay, the images that we're showing are these people. See, now I just skipped back to the 12th dynasty, but in this dynasty, these people were teaching trigonometry. In other words, we have papyri with math problems on them, the Rhind papyrus, the Moscow papyrus, with problems on them. These papyri were written in the 12th dynasty, and they had problems not only in geometry, but also in trigonometry. That just gives you an example of how much, how highly developed mathematics to the world.
All right.
Get my glasses on and actually read this a little bit. Yes. Problem number 56 in the Rhind mathematical papyrus, that's the one you see up there, seeks to find the slope of a pyramid whose height is 250 cubits and whose base is 360 cubits. The answer is 5 1/25 palms for each cubit in height, representing the cotangent of the angle of the slope of the pyramid's face. Now, if you've got a cotangent, if you can find cotangents, you know the way you can find tangents is that you flip the cotangent over. It's the inverse of a tangent. The other thing, too, just look at that. Imagine that that pyramid is three-dimensional, because that's what it's supposed to be. Now, all you really have to do is inscribe a triangle inside that pyramid, a right triangle whose height is also the same as the height of the pyramid. Therefore, the face becomes the hypotenuse, and half of the pyramid's base becomes the base of that right triangle, and then the height of the pyramid becomes the height of the right triangle. When you have all that in place, and it's really just a matter of drawing it in, you then can find sine and cosine. So now, if they had the tangent and cotangent and the ability to find sine and cosine, by definition, they have trigonometry. They have trigonometry.
Those 7 wonders of the world. This magnificent structure stands as tall as a 45-story building and is comprised of nearly 2.5 million stone blocks, which weigh an average of 2.5 tons each. This one building is comprised of enough stone to make 30 Empire State Buildings. The temple complex of Ipet-i-Sut, now called Karnak, was one of the greatest accomplishments ever achieved in Kemet. It is comprised of numerous temples, one of which contains the largest colonnaded hall ever constructed. This great hall consists of 136 columns, which stand in 16 rows. The tallest columns are 69 feet high and are large enough to accommodate a group of 100 men standing on its apex. This one room has enough floor space to equal the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. And the entire complex is large enough to accommodate all of the churches built in London since the birth of Jesus the Christ.
Look at this.
Go ahead.
Look at this. Who built like this? Awesome or what? Now look.
Everything is an echo and echo and echo. They haven't even begun to question the basics in this civilization. As Dr. Diop has shown, that a great deal of the Greek science, and we're not attacking the Greeks, because they had their own genius too, but the basis, all these things they claimed, you see, Hippocrates, taking sections out of the work of earlier Egyptian writers without giving any credit to them at all. Pythagoras, the Pythagorean theorem was worked out long ago. Pythagoras spent 7 years, some people say 22 in Egypt, and he comes back with all this, even medical theories, and brings it all back to Greece and all the claim. All the great European scholars went to Africa. Thales of Miletus, Democritus, Pythagoras, Eudoxus. There's a whole list of them walking into Africa, picking up things from astronomy, geometry, medicine, etc., and going back home and claiming it to be theirs. Father of this and father of that, when they're the children. To come on the ladder. No, sir. It's just the opposite. When you go and look at their medicine, I spoke in Atlanta to the Center for Disease Control. Africans had aspirin before us. They were using Salix capensis, which is salicylic acid, the main active ingredient in aspirin. They were using tetracycline 14 centuries ago in Nubia. They found the yellow-green flash of tetracycline in Nubian bones 14 centuries ago. They only started using that antibiotic in America in the 1950s. They pioneered in several operations. They pioneered in the cesarean operation. Dr. Finch has written a fine thing on the cesarean. At the time when that operation was experimental in Europe, people like Dr. Felkin went into Africa and observed the Banyoro surgeons performing the cesarean, and the mother was hale and hearty after 4 or 5 days. No woman survived the cesarean in Europe in the 1870s. None. No woman survived. And they observed the operation, the way they stitched, the way they opened the belly, the kind of instruments they used. They observed they were using one of the instruments, the cautery iron, with such fantastic skill. It was very minor tissue damage. It caused great ruptures in the European hospitals. They found that Africans were using both anesthetics and antiseptics in their operating theaters at that time, when in Europe, Lister had only introduced antiseptics 2 years earlier than the witness of this operation, which the witness said must have been going on for quite a while, because the Africans were performing with routine skill what was then experimental surgery in Europe.
No wonder Mama sent me to college. No wonder she said, son, remember the powers in the knowledge.
Point to the fact that the calendar we use today is derived from the Egyptian. They were the first people to invent the second of time, the second of art, the hour, the minute. Their astronomical observations over many years produced these ideas, these precise quantities and volumes and times and standards, which were later to dominate the world. The Babylonians did not have any proper calendar. The Egyptians had the 365 and a quarter days. That calendar was invented in Ethiopia since 4241 BC. And before I leave Egypt, as I say, I don't want to dwell too much on that, but other parts of Africa. But before I leave that, let me mention the discovery, the significant discovery, which Sheikh Anta Diop pointed to today, of Tarseti, the discovery of a monarchy in the Nile Valley preceding the Egyptian, at least 2 centuries before the first Egyptian dynasty. And at Tarseti, they found not only architectural forms to which Dr. Diop pointed to this morning, they found the falcon god Horus, they found the crown, the unmistakable, the uniquely shaped crown of the Egyptians. They found the palace facades that were later used by the Egyptians, and above all, they found the hieroglyphs, so that the world's first major writing system is not even Egyptian, it is Ethiopian.
Back in the day when I was schooling, blind and unwise to the lies my professor was spewing forth like it was written in stone, I didn't know that under him, the truth was unknown.
About 7 centuries ago, they found Africans were plotting an invisible star, Sirius B. Sirius A is a bright star we all see in the night sky. Sirius B is impossible to see with the naked eye. It is impossible to see it with the naked eye. It has a magnitude of about 8.5. And the Africans not only saw it, they plotted its orbit and trajectory right up to the end of the 20th century, up to the year 1990. And the diagram produced by our best astronomy today is identical with what they produced centuries ago. We only became aware of that star towards the end of the 19th century. And not only that, they intuited its mass. This is a white dwarf. It is an imploded star. It's not only impossible to see with the naked eye, it is the most sophisticated astronomy that has shown us that a star so imploded is much heavier than stars that appear 6 times brighter and larger. They came to that conclusion. They had plotted the spiral structure of the Milky Way. They had seen the Jupiter and Saturn, the rings and the moons thereof. They had worked all of that out, but particularly Sirius B. It caused such astonishment, such consternation in astronomical circles that Kenneth Brecher of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, he said, the Africans have no business knowing any of this. All destroyed. And yet the fragments exist, so significant that we have 10 major medical texts in African languages. The first medical texts in the world are in African language. The first mathematical papyri which you saw this morning, that's African. Those are the first. Even today, with all the destruction, we could still go back to the African documents and show them on a street. The Ebers papyrus, the Edwin Smith papyrus, the Smith papyrus, which is 1500 BC. They have chapters on helminthiasis, ophthalmology, gynecology, pregnancy diagnosis, circulation of the blood, the pulse, diagnostic percussion, all that, chapters, intestinal disease and all that 1500 years before Christ. Africans.
The architect responsible for the design of the step pyramid was a man named Imhotep. Imhotep was recorded in history as the world's first multi-genius. He is a prime minister to Zoser. He was a poet, a philosopher, a physician. He is considered to be the author of the world's oldest medical treatise ever written. It is a document that is now called the Edwin Smith Medical Papyrus. This book describes 48 different injuries to the head, to the face, to the neck, and the spinal column. It is held in high regard by members of the International College of Surgeons in Chicago, and it is noted for its accuracy and high scientific standard.
And I asked my teacher, he had nothing much to say to me. Kept seeking the truth, only more questions came to me. Kept seeking the truth about how all this came to be. Kept seeking the truth about how they was blaming me. Kept seeking the truth, and now it's plain to see. Kemet New made it all clear to me. The man with the ice, guess what?
There are so many evidences apart from the question of what the Greeks said, who actually saw these Egyptians, apart from all the evidence that Sheikh Anthony has brought forward and others, there is evidence, the migration, the movement of agriculture. Every major plant in Egypt, at least half a dozen are found coming from the south. There's not a single plant that comes down to the south. This nonsense about civilization, that civilization in Egypt was created by Asiatics and Caucasoids, and then they brought the light of civilization down to the benighted black barbarians in the south. Not a single shred of evidence. The script comes up, the agriculture comes up, all the symbols comes up, the conceptions of God and all the various forms that were to become deities in Egypt. It all comes from the south. The art, everything, you can see its origin in the south, in that Ethiopian and Sudanic world. And Ta-Seti is the culmination, it's the capping of the evidence. They found, for example, mathematical systems in Africa. The first use of numbers, the first scientific evidence of the use of numbers is found in the Congo Zaire. It's known as the Ishango bone. It's 8,000 years old. It's very simple, but it is cited because it's the first evidence we do have. But we have found more complex, far more complex mathematical systems, like the Yoruba, for example, are found to be using a complex mathematical system which one of the mathematicians, Conan, calls one of the most abstract and complex mathematical systems. Why didn't we know about this? Because if you go among the Bushmen and the Kalahari, or the Wugabuga and the Lugabuga, you're not going to find mathematics. Antic. Look at mathematics in Europe. It was nothing. Do you know that when the number system 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's Hindu, the Arabs and Africans invaded Europe as Moors, and the Arabs brought from India the numbers Fibonacci, yes, brought it to Europe first in 1202, but the Europeans didn't accept it because the church said numbers are works of the devil. It's as late as the 17th century.
He said that, he became more alert and more human being. He became more, you see, Malone became a more human being. Not just human being, you became a more yourself. You achieve your destiny when you go to Kemet school. You became a human being, more human. We are a human being already, but more human being. That means more wise. And when you go to Kemet school, when Plato himself compared what they do in Kemet school, I give Greek because it will be no debate. You see, it's our school in Greece, the way we are doing things is just for creatures like pigs. You see, like pigs. You see, and he said, myself, I'm ashamed. Myself as a Plato, I'm ashamed. We do things like that, is a shame. And also, not only for myself, for all Greek, the Greek world is a shame. What we can do, our education, when you compare with Kemet, is not even for human beings, it's just for pigs, for animals.
Presence in America, an academician, Sanarov, from one of the Soviet science cities, wrote me to talk about the various work that the Russians had been doing in this connection. They were dealing with Pacific connections while I was dealing with the Atlantic connections, and a dialogue began, and they informed me that one of their scientists, Volosimo, had discovered perfectly ground spherical crystal lenses in ancient Egypt, indicating that the Africans had telescopes. Galileo suggested the ancients had telescopes. He wouldn't believe. Galileo used the African water clock in his experiments. Many of us like to make noise today about colored people's time. There's no such thing. That is slave time. These are the things where we start to glorify incompetence, to glorify inefficiency. The Africans were remarkable in those times because they were the best in their field. They strove for excellence. Not everyone can be excellent, but you have to strive for it. It has to be an ideal. You don't just take for granted because you've been beaten down in a society, in a culture, in a period of time, that you must aspire to the worst in that society because that is what is expected of you. What they expect of us is their bloody business. It is what we expect of ourselves.
So make no mistake, you are dealing with extraordinary people. Because the next myth coming up in the 21st century is how the Japanese are the superior people of the world. It's going to shift from the European to the Asiatic. So get it quite clear. In the very early stages of civilization, something very unusual happened. I was with my wife in Egypt last summer and we went to Aswan. And I looked at a block, an obelisk, a stone obelisk which had been cut many centuries ago. And I looked at the way it had been cut, the perfection of the cut. I looked at the stone. And I wondered why they had abandoned this obelisk. They abandoned it, they said, because it had a flaw. And I looked carefully. It is true, my eyes are not what they used to be. I could not see this flaw, so I used my hands, which are extremely sensitive. And it had to be pointed out to me where the flaw was, and it was very clear to me it would have taken centuries for that flaw to really make a difference. But our people didn't play around with things. It had to be perfect. When the Japanese were building the pyramid, when they tried to put the stones in alignment, they cracked and broke and were badly scratched. When they went to check the stones that the Egyptians had put into alignment, 1/1000th of an inch accurate, not a single stone was scratched or cracked. You are dealing with people who felt you had to be as perfect as possible. Let us pray that those of us, our people who learn of their heritage, their ancestors, will not accept mediocrity as their standard.
Want to see the proof? Want to get that power? The power's in the knowledge, but it only comes to you when you know what your ancestors did, because only then do you know what you can do. The power's in the knowledge.
A coherent, cohesive discipline. Mathematics did not begin with the Greeks, even the Greeks say so. Geometry was an African invention. And Pythagoras admitted as much. And so did everybody who came after him. This is a written mathematical papyrus that is 4,000 years old. This is the title page. I'm just going to read you the translation of the title page. The entrance into the knowledge of all existing things and obscure secrets. Interesting title page for a mathematical treatise. We find in the Rind mathematical papyrus, we find formulas for the area of the rectangle, which is problem number 6. In the this is the Rind mathematical papyrus. There are, I think, 4 mathematical papyri that have been discovered. One is the Moscow mathematical papyrus, showing you the area of a rectangle, or the formula for obtaining the area of a rectangle. A equals L times B. This is what you call, this is problem number 14 of the Moscow papyrus. This is the formula for finding the volume of a truncated pyramid. Now, the volume for a truncated pyramid gives you volume equals height, 1/3 the height, times a squared, ab plus b squared. This is actually more difficult than finding the volume of the total pyramid. So if they could, check on the job says, he who can do more can do less. So if they can find the volume of the truncated pyramid, they also knew the volume of the pyramid, how to find the volume of the pyramid. 1/3 of the height times area squared. This is problem number 56, also from the Rin Mathematical Papyrus. This is a problem that allows them to demonstrate how to find the slope of the pyramid. And in this problem, they actually deal with cotangents, showing that they had also not only begun their studies in geometry, but also in trigonometry as well. Among these ancient people of the Nile, these ancient black peoples of the Nile, we find the first evidence of algebra, because in the Rin Mathematical Papyruses, number 24 to 27, are algebraic equations of the first degree. They also handled algebraic equations of the second degree. Algebra is basically, if you have to strip it down to its essentials, its ability to solve problems when you have an unknown. Now we call that unknown usually X or Y. The ancient Kamites used to call it a quantity.
Ancient Egyptian. Logic, arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and music, what we call the 7 liberal arts. This was the educational system that was in place at the time that Greek people came to Kemet.
Now go back and show who the people were that established this.
Okay, the people, the ones
images you showed earlier.
Okay, the images that we're showing are these people. See, now I just skipped back to the 12th dynasty, but in this dynasty, these people were teaching trigonometry. In other words, we have papyri with math problems on them, the Rhine papyrus, the Moscow papyrus, with problems on them. These papyri were written in the 12th dynasty, and they had problems not only in geometry, but also in trigonometry. That just gives you an example of how much, how highly developed mathematics to the world.
All right.
Get my glasses on and actually read this a little bit. Yes. Problem number 56 in the Rin Mathematical Papyrus, that's the one you see up there, seeks to find the slope of a pyramid whose height is 250 cubits and whose base is 360 cubits. The answer is 5 1/25 palms for each cubit in height, representing the cotangent of the angle of the slope of the pyramid's face. Now, if you've got a cotangent, if you can find cotangents, you know the way you can find tangents is that you flip the cotangent over. It's the inverse of a tangent. The other thing, too, just look at that. Imagine that that pyramid is three-dimensional, because that's what it's supposed to be. Now, all you really have to do is inscribe a triangle inside that pyramid, a right triangle whose height is also the same as the height of the pyramid. Therefore, the face becomes the hypotenuse, and half of the pyramid's base becomes the base of that right triangle, and then the height of the pyramid becomes the height of the right triangle. When you have all that in place, and it's really just a matter of drawing it in, you then can find sine and cosine. So now, if they have the tangent and cotangent and the ability to find sine and cosine, by definition, they have trigonometry.
No wonder Mama sent me to college. No wonder she said, son, remember the powers in the knowledge.
Point to the fact that the calendar we use today is derived from the Egyptian. They were the first people to invent the second of time, the second of art, the hour, the minute. Their astronomical observations over many years produced these ideas, these precise quantities and volumes and times and standards which were later to dominate the world. The Babylonians did not have any proper calendar. The Egyptians had the 365 1/4 days. That calendar was invented in Ethiopia since 4241 BC. And before I leave Egypt, as I say, I don't want to dwell too much on that.
Quantity, aha. This is the earliest example of algebraic procedure. Right, did we know then that black people invented algebra? There's the proof. And therefore, if people knew their history, if people knew that their history was relevant, then they wouldn't want to be trying to aspire to be somebody else.
That's right, that's right.
Right, the calibration of the Karnak water clock. Right, let me explain this. Right, what's going on here? There's a water clock where if you look at the inside of it, we've got it divided up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 months, right? And then at certain points of the month, the days get longer and shorter. Does that make sense? And therefore, the calibration of the holes is different. So each hole is 1 hour. So you get it? So when you fill it, there's your first hour, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th. You follow me? And then by the time it runs out, 12 hours. So we've got 12 hours of the night is what this actually represents. Now, the idea of the hour, that's an African concept. We invented that. The concept of time is an African concept. We invented that. So we've got the concept of numbers and algebra. We've now got the concept of time.
It has nothing to do with the reality. So, I'm fond of asking young black students is why are you afraid of mathematics? Why do you run away from mathematics and physics? Africa invented mathematics and physics. That isn't my opinion, that just happens to be the reality. I didn't make it happen. That just happens to be the way it is. And the Greeks themselves say so, not once, not twice, but at least a dozen times. All the Greek mathematicians studied in Egypt. Eudoxus, Archimedes, Hipparchus, Pythagoras, Thales, Plato. In fact, the Greeks were in the habit, if they didn't study in Egypt, they would say they would in order to give themselves credibility.
Of that civilization. But what's important is that when Kemet appears in the human record, it appears in 3100 BC with a fully developed civilization. Writing was already in place. Astronomy was already in place. They already had the 365-day year calendar and 1 quarter for the leap year and all of that. That calendar had actually been put in place around 4236 BC. So we're talking about a fully developed, high technical civilization.
Okay, good. This is the interior of the Grand Gallery, showing how it would have been used to measure the time of movement of the stars across this particular area. And it would have therefore given them some way of measuring the minute of arc.
Why didn't we know about this? Because if you go among the Bushmen and the Kalahari, or the Wooga and the Luga, you're not going to find mathematics. Antic. Look at mathematics in Europe. It was nothing. Do you know that when the number system 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's Hindu, the Arabs and Africans invaded Europe as Moors, and the Arabs brought from India the numbers Fibonacci, yes, brought it to Europe first in 1202, but the Europeans didn't accept it because the church said numbers are works of the devil. It's as late as the 17th century.
I'm going to say a little bit about the Great Pyramid. Certainly the grandest edifice of its kind ever created by the hand of man. Just want to say I just want to point out 2 things about the Great Pyramid. 483 feet in height. The base of the pyramid is 13 acres in area. It was built out of 2.8 million, 2.7 million blocks of stone. The lightest stone was 1 ton. The heaviest was 7 tons. Planed to such a smoothness that when they were fitted together, if you plucked the hair out of your head, you could not fit it between the joints. Oriented precisely to the 4 cardinal points. The descending passage was built at 3 degrees 43 minutes in slope. Oriented exactly to Alpha Draconis, which shone down at 3340 BC, 3340 BC. and it won't shine it down it again until 26,000 years later. The height of the pyramid, if you multiply it by 1 billion, gives you the mean distance between Earth and Sun. People say that's a coincidence. Well, if there is such thing as a father of medicine, it is this man or it is no one, Imhotep. Even though he lived 3,000 years before Hippocrates, we actually know more about him than we know about Hippocrates. We knew who his parents were, we knew where he was born, where he was raised, what he did. He was, as Sir William Osler, and this was Osler's institution right here. Osler practically founded this institution, did he not? Osler said of Imhotep, and by the way, Osler himself was, I've read some books by Osler. Osler was no joke. He was real. He was a real Renaissance physician, one of the last in this country anyway. And what does he say about Imhotep? The first figure of a physician to stand out clearly from the mists of antiquity. Or as I like to call him, the first universal genius of whom we have any knowledge. He was prime minister under Djoser, so therefore a statesman. He was renowned as a philosopher and a purveyor of oral wisdom. He was an architect of genius, having designed and built the step pyramid of Saqqara, but above all, he was a divinely gifted physician. So great was his renown as a physician that by the 6th century BC, he became deified as a physician and worshipped by the Greeks, including Hippocrates. Because Asclepios was identified with Imhotep. So when you worship Asclepios, you would worship Imhotep. So in the Hippocratic Oath, when the physician says, I swear by the god Apollo and I swear by the god Imhotep, I swear by Asclepios, he is in fact swearing by Imhotep.
Imhotep, the father of medicine and a black multi-genius. The achievements of the black people of ancient Egypt have shown us that black people built truly one of the greatest civilizations of ancient times. But do you know that a person generally regarded as the most talented individual in the history of the ancient world was a black man? He was an Egyptian named Imhotep. Imhotep was the son of an architect. He lived during the reign of King Zoser of Egypt in 2980 BC. He was an exceptionally brilliant man. He was versed in medicine, architecture, engineering, philosophy, poetry, religion, and astronomy. It is through his work and writings that the Western world first learned of the existence of objective and scientific medicine based on the repeated and careful observation of a patient. It is said also that Imhotep knew about the circulation of the blood. He discovered this at least 4,000 years before it was known in Europe. Imhotep diagnosed and treated more than 200 diseases. These included disorders of the eyes, bladder, abdomen, and skin. Imhotep's contribution to the development of medical knowledge in the ancient world was such that the Greeks worshipped him as the father of medicine and their god of healing. Much later, after the sacking of Egypt by Alexander the Great in 332 BC, many laid claim to Imhotep's achievements. Today, Western civilization holds to the belief that the Greek Hippocrates was the father of medicine. Yet, the Hippocratic Oath taken by every medical doctor in Western civilization pays homage to the god Apollo and the father of medicine, Asclepius, which incidentally was the Greek name for Imhotep. Apart from his work in medicine, Imhotep designed the first pyramid, which was built by the Egyptians. This pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Saqqara, was an outstanding example of this black genius's engineering and architectural skill. It was the first building in the world to be constructed solely from stone and was one of the tallest buildings in the ancient world.
Appendicitis, gout, and arthritis. He also performed surgery and practiced some dentistry. This is the world's oldest known surgical document, the Edwin C. Smith Papyrus. Edwin Smith was merely a purchaser of precious antiquities. He had no ownership in its genius. That belongs to the African Renaissance man, Imhotep. The Edwin C. Smith Papyrus is a medical book of 48 different surgical procedures written in exquisite detail, dealing with cranial sutures, the external surface of the brain, examination, diagnosis, and treatment of head injuries, fractures of the neck, collarbone, skull, nose, and arm, as well as tumors, cysts, sprains, and dislocations. Imhotep not only made an impression on his pharaoh Zoser and the elites of the Third Dynasty, he left a legacy that would last for more than 2,000 years after his death.
We are doing this because it is necessary to revise the history of man. The tremendous anguish which is deep in the heart of all of us, which arises out of these falsehoods, the falsehoods upon which this civilization are built, have got to go.
Look at Proverbs, the simple believeth every word, but the prudent man looketh well to his going.